Hello and welcome to Encore. In today's show, we'll be speaking to Andres Serrano, the artist who got himself name-checked in the US Senate for creating controversial works of art that some politicians think should be banned. No stranger to scandal on both sides of the Atlantic, his works covered homelessness, sexuality and race. His latest show here in France is throwing a religious gaze on some classical portraits. Andres is here to tell us more, so let's go and meet him. Hi Andres, thanks so much for being with us.
Sure, hi.
Well, you're in France to show a new collection of work in Vence, in the south of France. The show's called So Be It, or Amen in English. That's a very biblical title for a set of quite religious-inspired classical portraits. What is it about religion as a theme or a subject that interests you?
Well, I was born and raised a Catholic, and I've been a Christian all my life. And I never realized how in tune I was with Christianity until I began to do my early work, and then I saw a lot of references to the Catholic Church, to Jesus, and I realized that it was something I was drawn to, even almost beyond my power to control it.
So it was almost subconscious. Now, religion has been at the centre of a lot of controversy surrounding your pieces. Your reputation precedes you a little here in France. In 2011, a row erupted in Avignon in the south of France over a piece of art called Piss Christ, which purports to be a photograph of a crucifix in your own urine. There were demonstrations against the photo, and it was even vandalised. How did you feel about these attacks on your work?
Well, these attacks are usually generated by people who have their own agenda, even, particularly when they're conservative or right-wing extremists. In that case, I think it was the Bishop of Avignon who incited the rabble. And it's always someone who has an agenda other than mine. Mine is as an artist and as a Christian.
Well, you were defended, indeed, by the then Minister of Culture, Frédéric Mitterrand, who said, this is freedom of artistic expression, but not supported by the people of Avignon, who were, demonstrating for whatever reason. Right now in France, after the Charlie Hebdo attacks here in Paris, there is a large debate about freedom of expression, how far that can go, and when it offends people, for example. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on freedom of expression, are limited to my own, to my views, both as an artist and as a viewer. That you have the right. Freedom of expression gives you the right to not like something, the right to express it. It also gives, those who are, artists and creators like myself, it gives us the right to do what we feel we need to do. One of the things that I feel most misunderstood about is the fact that I'm a Christian. I'm not blasphemous, I'm not sacrilegious, and I'm not an outsider making fun of my religion. On the contrary, I work within my religion, within the symbols of my faith, and very much in tune with what I feel like I have to do as an artist. Now,
in the US, much of the controversy, actually, was about the fact that you received a National Endowment for the Arts grant, that you were making this art with public money. And then it makes us consider, when public money is involved in the making of art, does it curb artistic freedoms, and can it set an agenda in some cases?
Well, to set the record straight, I received not a whole grant from the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, but a partial grant. I received $15,000 from an organization that had received $5,000 from the NEA. At the time that I received that money, I was a poor artist. I made no income. I paid very little taxes. Since then, because of the fact that, my name became so prominent and I sold so much work, I've paid millions of dollars back in taxes, So you have to figure it was a great investment for the government and for the United States.
Yeah, so it goes both ways. Now, I had a little technical question about the immersion series, which we're talking about here. Some of them involved bodily fluids. That's what was so controversial about them. You made them 2D by photographing these installations, because originally you made the installations. Why did you choose to present them as photographs, not as 3D pieces?
Well, it goes back to my early days as a student at the Brooklyn Museum Art School. I studied painting and sculpture, but after 2 years, I felt like I couldn't paint or sculpt, and so at the time I lived with a girlfriend who had a camera, and so I started taking pictures, but always saw myself as an artist rather than as a photographer. And I still see myself as a conceptual artist with a camera. And so I think outside the box, you know, in terms of photography, in terms of art. But I've limited my art practice to photographs. I could create other things. I could do sculptures, I could do films, but no one thinks of me to invite me to do something other than photographs. So, but I'm open.
Okay. And in terms of using, for example, your body in your work, whether it's fluid or whether it's performance, it's something that was perhaps more controversial in the 80s or the 90s. We hadn't seen so much of it. But now people like Mark Quinn have used his own blood to make a sculpture. Do you think that that would still be taboo today, or what is the last taboo now?
I don't know what the first or last taboo are, because I never tried to break taboos. You know, I've tried to be a pioneer. I've tried to break new ground for myself and for my audience. And so, but, you know, things that were taboo, you know, yesterday, you know, won't be taboo tomorrow. I mean, when I was a kid, I read that Ulysses by James Joyce was taboo in the 30s, and I thought that was ridiculous, you know, that this book was illegal in America. You know, now you would laugh about it, but, you know, so things, it always takes one person sometimes, you know, maybe more than one, but usually one to start the ball rolling.
And pushing boundaries. Now, we're moving to Cuba, somewhere that I know you've been working recently. That is because as Cuba moves towards normalizing diplomatic ties with the US, the two countries' cultural spheres could come together as well. This report by Mariam Saab gives us a glance at Cuba's thriving art scene.
Americans on a mission in Cuba. Collectors tour Roberto Diago's Havana studio, hoping to uncover a showpiece. On the cusp of a cultural boom, the island is tipped to be the global art market's hot new hub.
What fraction of a % of America has seen Cuba in the last 60 years? So I think Cuban art is about to explode. I mean, it's going up fast, faster than everyone anticipated.
Books, films, music and artwork flew through a little-known cultural loophole and outside the 1962 embargo imposed by the United States. A lifeline for many Cuban artists. Kadir Lopez sold his first piece for $300 20 years ago. Today, he says the same piece is worth at least $25,000.
Fue una excepción del embargo.
It was an exception of the embargo. Why? It was lucky for us. It's because art carries information. It's a flux of information, and that has to do with freedom of expression.
Con la libertad de expresión.
Ending the embargo could bring 1 million more tourists to the island every year, according to Cuban officials. For some local artists, the surrounding hype is a double-edged sword.
Yo veo como un boom que puede ser bueno y peligroso.
I think this boom can be good and dangerous. It all depends on whether we will be able to handle this avalanche of demand, of people who want to discover, see and learn, and others who will want to speculate. We have to be careful.
The embargo would have to be lifted for real change to take place, an unlikely event in the short term, with the US Republican-led House strongly opposing the move. With the US and Cuba on friendlier terms, the island is showing more of its colours to the world, emerging as art's not-so-forbidden fruit.
Andres, you've worked in Cuba and you've exhibited at the Havana Biennale. You've got close family ties to the country. How do you see the country's cultural future? What would this change in diplomatic relations?
You know, it's both good and bad. You know, Cuba unfairly has been isolated from the rest of the world because of the embargo, and those people down there have suffered a lot. You know, on the other hand, you could see that with opening up Cuba, that the first in line to go to Cuba will be the opportunists, the people, the big corporations, and all the people who can suck some money out of Cuba. And so, you know, it's a double-edged sword. Cuba needs to become part of the world economy, at the same time, you know who's going to be first in line to exploit Cuba.
Okay, well, we'll see how that pans out. Now, I wanted to move to another of your recent projects where you took your photographs out of the studio setting and into the streets of New York. Now, the project is called Residents of New York, where you documented the lives of the city's homeless population. Now, when I was looking at these photos, I really felt like I was getting a kind of social insight as to the reality in that city. And it made me think that it was quite a journalistic project, a photojournalistic project. Are you veering into journalistic territory there?
Well, not really, because I took my camera, my equipment, my flash, my tripod, and my studio into the streets. I made the streets my studio. And so it's not a point-and-shoot thing. It's a situation where I have a relationship with those people. They know I'm there, even if they're not looking at me. We've negotiated, you know, the terms of the agreement to be photographed. And so they know they're being photographed, and I see them as studio portraits, you know. And the reason I did it, because as a New Yorker, I found more homeless than ever last year on the streets. And so I felt like it was necessary for me to make some work about it. I like to make work about things that everyone sees, but no one is talking about.
And indeed, it's something that we see here in Europe, and that project will be going to Brussels in Belgium as well. Now, sadly, that's all we've got time for. Thanks for being with us, Andres, and thanks to you at home for watching. We'll leave you with some pictures of the Residents of New York series, just to remind you that Andres Serrano's work is on show at the Musée de Vence in the south of France until June 10th. Remember, you can get more culture news on our website. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Well, Residents of New York is a project I did photographing homeless people on the streets. I didn't want to call them homeless because it's such a cliche. And so I chose instead the name Residents of New York because they are residents and they live in New York City.